There are moments when eternity leans close and whispers, and this is one of them. You have wandered long in the shadows, questioning if the door before you was ever meant to open. Yet now, in a breath as brief as 10 seconds, heaven signals that your waiting was not in vain. This is not chance, nor coincidence, it is a summons. The threshold stands before you, alive with consequence, urging you not to hesitate, not to turn away. You have been taught, perhaps without ever realizing it, to measure your life by the slow ticking of visible clocks. Days pass, months accumulate, and you begin to assume that what has not yet happened must surely be delayed, misplaced, or worse, denied. The human heart, when left alone with time, often misreads silence as absence and waiting as abandonment. Yet what appears to you as delay is, in truth, something far more deliberate, far more precise than your senses can easily grasp. For heaven does not operate within the narrow corridors of human urgency. It moves according to a rhythm that is neither hurried nor late, but exact. Consider how often you have stood at the edge of expectation, believing that the moment had already passed you by. You counted the days, watched others advance, and quietly concluded that your turn had been overlooked. But this conclusion rests upon an assumption that visible progress is the only evidence of movement. In reality, much of what is most vital occurs beyond the reach of your sight. Roots grow downward long, before any branch dares to rise upward, and the deeper the root, the stronger the tree that will eventually stand. What you have called delay is often the careful alignment of unseen elements, each one necessary, each one placed with intention. There are forces at work that do not announce themselves, preparations unfolding in silence, shaping both circumstances and your own inner being. For if the door had opened earlier, you might have stepped through it unready, unable to carry what lies beyond it. Timing, then, is not merely about the event itself, but about the condition of the one who receives it. And so, the waiting has not been empty. It has been filled with quiet alterations, subtle shifts in your character, your resilience, your perception. You have been strengthened in ways you did not recognize, taught lessons you did not know you were learning. The very frustrations you endured have served as instruments, refining something within you that could not have been formed in comfort or immediacy. It is a peculiar thing, this divine timing, because it often feels indistinguishable from delay until the very moment it reveals its purpose. Only when the door finally opens do you begin to see that it could not have opened a moment sooner without consequence. The pieces, once scattered and incomprehensible, suddenly form a pattern so precise that you are left wondering how you ever doubted its design. Yet the danger lies in clinging too tightly to your own interpretation of time. For if you insist that what feels delayed must therefore be lost, you may grow weary at the very threshold of fulfillment. You may turn away, believing there is nothing ahead, when in truth everything is already prepared. The illusion of delay tempts you to disengage, to withdraw your expectation, to settle into a quieter, lesser hope. But heaven's timing does not ask for your approval to remain true. It asks only for your trust to hold steady in the unseen, to resist the conclusion that nothing is happening simply because nothing is visible. And now, as you stand closer than you realize, the years you once called delay gather themselves into a single, decisive moment, revealing that they were never wasted, never misplaced, but were always leading you, step by hidden step, to this very point where time itself seems to pause, not because it has failed you, but because it has finally fulfilled its purpose, and in that stillness you begin to sense that what has been happening all along was never meant for your eyes alone, but for your becoming. For there is a kind of work that is too delicate to be displayed, too essential to be rushed into visibility. It takes place beneath the surface of your ordinary days, in the quiet shaping of thought, in the slow bending of will, in the unseen rearranging of desires that once pulled you in 100 uncertain directions. You may remember a time when you would have rushed forward at the slightest opening, driven more by impulse than by understanding. You would have seized the door simply because it appeared, without asking whether you had the strength to walk what lay beyond it. But something has changed in you, though you may struggle to name it. The haste that once defined you has been softened, the impatience that once ruled you has been gently, persistently undone. This did not happen in a moment of revelation. but through countless small experiences that seemed, at the time, unrelated or even inconvenient. It is here that the unseen preparation reveals its quiet authority. For while you were occupied with what you could observe, something deeper was being arranged. Your disappointments were not discarded, they were repurposed. Your delays were not empty, they were instructional. Even your doubts, which you feared might disqualify you, were allowed to remain just long enough to teach you the difference between relying on your own certainty and learning to trust. Beyond it, there is in this preparation a kind of precision that defies human expectation. You were not only being positioned for the moment, you were being reshaped to withstand it. For what is given too soon is often lost just as quickly, not because it lacks value, but because the one receiving it has not yet been formed to carry its weight. And so what you interpreted as inactivity was, in truth, a careful construction, layer upon layer, within your inner life. You have been learning to see differently, though you may not have noticed the lesson as it unfolded. Things that once captivated you no longer hold the same power. Paths that once seemed desirable now appear strangely hollow. This is no accident. It is the quiet redirection of your attention, guiding you away from what would have distracted you from the very thing you are now approaching. The preparation is not only about readiness, it is also about refinement, about ensuring that when the moment arrives, you will recognize it for what it truly is. And yet, this unseen work often feels like loss while it is happening. You may have felt as though something was being taken from you, when in reality, something else was being made possible. The subtraction was necessary, not as a punishment, but as a clearing. For the door you are about to face does not open into what you once imagined, it leads into something that requires a different version of you. One that could not exist without this process of quiet transformation. It is a strange paradox that the most important preparations in your life are the ones you are least aware of while they are taking place. You do not hear the machinery, you do not see the hands arranging the pieces, and so you are tempted to believe that nothing is happening at all. But now, as you stand at the edge of this moment, you begin to realize that the ground beneath you has been carefully laid, that your steps have been guided more than you understood, that your very presence here is evidence of a preparation so thorough it could not afford to announce itself prematurely, and this realization brings with it a subtle but profound shift. For you are no longer merely waiting for something to happen, you are beginning to understand that something has already been happening within you, steadily, patiently, bringing you to the precise condition required for what comes next, where the question is no longer whether you are ready in your own estimation, but whether you will trust the work that has been done in you when the moment finally demands that you move. And it is here that hesitation reveals itself not as a harmless pause, but as a final and searching test. For after all the unseen preparation, after the long alignment of time and the quiet shaping of your inner life, there comes a moment that asks something very simple and yet profoundly difficult. Will you act upon what you have been given, or will you retreat into the safety of what you have already known? Hesitation has a peculiar voice. It does not shout, nor does it openly oppose the path before you. Instead, it whispers in tones that seem reasonable, even wise. It suggests that perhaps a little more time would be beneficial, that a bit more clarity is needed, that waiting just a moment longer might somehow improve the outcome. And yet, beneath this calm appearance lies a subtle resistance, a reluctance to step fully into what cannot be controlled. You must understand that. Hesitation often disguises itself as caution, but the two are not the same. Caution observes and prepares, it sharpens your awareness and steadies your footing. Hesitation, however, lingers when preparation has already been completed. It keeps you standing at the threshold long after the door has begun to open. Not because there is more to learn, but because there is something you are reluctant to release. For to move forward in this moment requires a kind of surrender, not of effort, but of certainty. You are being asked to trust what has been formed within you, even if you cannot fully explain it, even if you cannot see every step that lies ahead. This is where many turn back, not because they are unworthy of what is before them, but because they are unwilling to step into a future that does not present itself in complete and comfortable detail. There is also the quiet presence of fear, though it rarely announces itself directly. It attaches itself to questions. What if this is? not the right moment? What if I misunderstand what is being asked of me? What if I step forward and find that I am not as prepared as I believed? These questions, while appearing thoughtful, often serve as anchors, holding you in place when everything else is urging you to move. But consider this. If the moment has arrived after such careful preparation, if the door stands open after such precise timing, then the hesitation you feel is not evidence that you are unready. It is evidence that the step you're about to take truly matters. For insignificant moments do not demand courage, they pass by unnoticed, requiring little more than passive agreement. It is only the moments that shape your path, that alter your direction, that ask something deeper of you. And so hesitation becomes the final test, not of your ability, but of your willingness. It asks whether you will trust the process that has led you here, whether you will believe that the work done in silence is sufficient for the step now required. It is not a test designed to exclude you, but to reveal what you will do when the unseen becomes visible, when preparation gives way to action. You stand, then, in a space that is both fragile and powerful, where the distance between staying and stepping is measured not in miles, but in a single decision. And the longer you remain suspended in hesitation, the more you risk mistaking this moment for another passing opportunity, when in truth, it is something far more decisive, something that will not linger indefinitely, but waits only long enough for you to choose whether you will cross from what has been into what is now being offered. And it is in this narrowing space that the weight of those 10 seconds begins to reveal itself, not as a measure of ordinary time, but as something far more concentrated, almost as though eternity itself has been distilled into a brief and urgent window. You are accustomed to thinking of time as something that stretches, something that can be revisited, delayed, or reclaimed. But there are moments when time does not behave so generously, when it gathers its meaning into a single point and asks for an answer that cannot be postponed without consequence. These 10 seconds are not significant because of their duration, but because of their nature. They represent a convergence, a meeting place where all that has been prepared, all that has been aligned, suddenly stands before you at once. It is not that heaven has become hurried, but that the moment has reached its fullness. Like a door that cannot remain open forever without losing its purpose, this window exists only as long as it retains its meaning, and its meaning is bound to your response. You may find it difficult to accept that something so brief could carry such weight. The mind prefers longer stretches, more comfortable intervals, spaces where decisions can be softened by delay. But the soul recognizes something different. It senses when a moment is charged, when it carries within it a significance that exceeds its appearance. And in such moments, length becomes irrelevant, because what is being asked is not how long you will consider, but whether you will recognize what stands before you. There is, in this idea, a certain severity that cannot be ignored. For if the window is real, then so too is the possibility that it may close. Not as a punishment, nor as an act of withdrawal, but as a natural conclusion to a moment that has fulfilled its purpose. A door that remains open indefinitely ceases to be a door at all. It becomes merely an empty frame, stripped of urgency, stripped of meaning. It is the limitation, the briefness, that gives the moment its force. And yet, this is where many falter, not because they fail to see the opportunity, but because they struggle to accept its immediacy. They wish to preserve the moment, to stretch it beyond its intended shape, to negotiate with it, as though it were flexible. But these 10 seconds do not bend. They do not adjust themselves to your hesitation or your preference for certainty. They remain what they are, an invitation that exists within a boundary. It is important to understand that this boundary is not arbitrary. It is not designed to trap you or to rush you into error. Rather, it serves to reveal the clarity of your decision. For when time is limited, you are drawn away from endless analysis and brought face to face with what you truly believe, what you are truly willing to do. The distractions fall away, the lesser concerns lose their hold, and what remains is a simple, unadorned choice. In this sense, the 10 seconds are merciful even as they are demanding. They strip the moment of unnecessary complication and present it in its purest form. You are not being asked to calculate every outcome, nor to secure every assurance. You are being asked to respond, to step forward, or to remain where you are, to trust what has been prepared, or to retreat into what feels familiar. And as these seconds pass, whether slowly in your perception or swiftly beyond your control, they carry with them the quiet understanding that this is not merely a fragment of time, but a threshold compressed into an instant, where the decision you make does not simply occupy those seconds, but echoes far beyond them, shaping what follows in ways that cannot be undone by wishing for more time once the moment has already passed past, and in the quiet that follows such a moment, you begin to recognize that what stood before you was never unguarded. For every threshold of consequence is watched over, not by visible sentinels, but by something far more subtle and persistent, the presence of fear. It does not bar the way with force, nor does it forbid your passage outright. Instead, it lingers at the edge, shaping your perception, altering the way you interpret what lies ahead, until the path itself begins to seem uncertain. Fear is rarely as obvious as you expect it to be. It does not always arrive as panic or trembling. More often, it appears as a quiet tightening within you, a hesitation that feels justified, even necessary. It tells you that caution is wisdom, that stepping forward too soon may lead to regret, that remaining where you are is the safer course. And because these suggestions carry a certain logic, you are inclined to listen, to consider, to pause just long enough for the moment to begin slipping away. But what fear truly guards is not your safety, it guards your transformation. For beyond this point, beyond this door, lies a version of your life that cannot coexist with the one you have known. To step forward is to leave something behind. Familiar patterns, predictable outcomes, even certain parts of your identity that have defined you for longer than you realize. Fear senses this loss, and it resists it, not because what lies ahead is harmful, but because it is different. You may notice how fear attaches itself to what you value most. It raises questions about your readiness, your worthiness, your ability to sustain what you are about to receive. It suggests that perhaps you have misread the moment, that perhaps this door was never meant for you in the first place. And these thoughts, though subtle, begin to weigh upon you, making the step forward feel heavier than it truly is. Yet there is something important you must see. Fear grows strongest at the point where it is about to lose its hold. It intensifies not prepared, but because you are nearer than ever to moving beyond its reach. If you were far from this moment, fear would remain quiet, almost indifferent. It is only now, when your breakthrough stands within reach, that it gathers its voice, attempting one final effort to keep you where it has always known you to remain. This is why the barrier feels so real, so convincing. It is not an external obstacle that can be easily dismissed, but an internal resistance that speaks in voice, using your own thoughts, your own memories, your own past uncertainties. It becomes difficult to distinguish between what is true and what is merely familiar. And in that confusion, hesitation finds new strength. But fear, for all its persistence, has a limitation: it cannot decide for you. It can suggest, it can influence, it can even distort your perception, but it cannot take the step that lies before you. That remains yours alone. And the moment you move, even slightly, even perfectly, its authority begins to weaken. For beyond the door is not merely a change in circumstance, but a change in being. The person who crosses that threshold is not the same as the one who stood before it, weighed down by doubt and uncertainty. And fear, knowing this, does all it can to preserve what is familiar, even if what is familiar is no longer where you are meant to remain. So you find yourself in a quiet tension, aware that what holds you back is not an absence of opportunity, but the presence of something that has always sought to define your limits. And in recognizing this, you begin to see that the barrier is not as immovable as it once appeared, but is instead a final veil, thin yet persuasive, waiting to see whether you will accept its version of your future or step beyond it into something it cannot follow. And it is precisely at this boundary that another voice begins to emerge, quieter than fear, yet carrying a weight that is not easily dismissed. It does not argue with the noise, nor does it strive to overpower it. Instead, it speaks with a kind of calm authority, as though it has no need to convince, only to be recognized. This is the voice that has accompanied you long before this moment, though you may have struggled to distinguish it from the many other sounds that fill your mind. The difficulty has never been that this voice is absent, but that it is often overshadowed. Doubt is loud, insistent, and immediate. It demands attention, presenting itself with urgency and a multitude of reasons. It builds its case quickly, drawing from past disappointments, from imagined outcomes, from every uncertainty that has ever unsettled you. In contrast, the voice of heaven does not rush. It does not overwhelm you with arguments. It simply remains steady and unwavering, offering a clarity that does not depend on volume. You may notice that this voice does not speak in confusion. It does not multiply possibilities until you are paralyzed by choice. Rather, it simplifies. Where doubt creates complexity, this voice draws a line, gentle yet unmistakable, guiding you toward a direction that feels both unfamiliar and strangely certain. It does not answer every question you might ask, but it addresses something deeper than your questions, the part of you that already knows, even if you hesitate to admit it. And yet, because it lacks the urgency of fear, it is easy to overlook. You have grown accustomed to responding to what presses most strongly upon you, to what insists on being heard. The quiet does not demand, it invites. It waits for your attention rather than seizing it. And so, in moments of pressure, you may find yourself leaning toward the louder voice, mistaking its intensity for truth. But consider the nature of what each voice produces within you. Doubt leaves you unsettled, circling endlessly without resolution, drawing you deeper into hesitation. The voice of heaven, even when it calls you towards something challenging, carries with it a certain stillness. It does not eliminate uncertainty, but it steadies you within it. It does not remove the need for courage, but it makes courage possible. There is also a difference in how these voices relate to time. Doubt seeks to prolong, to extend the moment indefinitely so that no decision need be made. It thrives in delay, finding strength in your unwillingness to conclude. The voice of heaven, however, is not concerned with stretching the moment. It speaks to it precisely as it is, offering direction that aligns with the very timing you now face. It does not urge you to wait when the moment calls for movement, nor does it rush you when stillness is required. You may begin to realize that this voice has been guiding you all along, though not always in ways you recognized. It has nudged you away from paths that seemed promising but would have led you elsewhere. It has drawn your attention to things you might have otherwise ignored. And now, as you stand at this decisive point, it does not overwhelm you with new instructions. Instead, it echoes what has already been placed within you, confirming rather than complicating. The challenge then is not to discover something entirely new, but to discern what has already been quietly made known. To listen, not for the loudest argument, but for the truest direction. To allow the noise to settle just enough that you can perceive what does not depend on noise to exist. And in that perception, you find yourself faced with a simple but profound choice. Whether you will align yourself with the voice that calls you forward, even without complete explanation, or remain bound to the one that keeps you circling within the limits of your own uncertainty, where clarity is never reached because it is never truly sought beyond the comfort of hesitation, and in this tension between noise and clarity, you begin to understand that the threshold before you was never merely about movement, but about surrender not of reason but of control. For crossing into what lies beyond does not demand that you possess every answer in advance, but that you release the illusion that every answer must be possessed before action can begin. It is here that the act of stepping forward becomes less about certainty and more about trust in what has already been quietly established within you. Surrender, in its truest form, is often misunderstood. It is not the collapse of strength, nor the abandonment of thought. Rather, it is the recognition that strength alone is not the final measure of readiness, and that thought, when isolated, cannot carry you into the fullness of what awaits. There comes a point where holding on too tightly to control becomes the very thing that prevents you from entering what has already been prepared for you. And so, surrender is not weakness set as alignment with what exceeds your own limited framing of possibility. You may find this difficult because everything within your past experience has taught you to secure outcomes before you move toward them. You have been conditioned to seek guarantees, to minimize uncertainty, to ensure that every step is accounted for before it is taken. Yet the nature of this moment does not accommodate such demands. It does not unfold in response to complete assurance. It responds instead to the willingness to move, while still seeing only part of the path. Faith in this sense is not the absence of understanding, but the decision to act beyond the boundary of what understanding can presently confirm. It is not blind, as it is often described, but attentive to a different kind of evidence, the accumulated weight of preparation, the quiet consistency of inner prompting, the strange coherence of events that, in hindsight, reveal themselves as guidance rather than coincidence. To surrender, then, is to acknowledge that your perception of the whole picture has never been complete, and that completeness was never required for movement to be meaningful. There is a moment within every significant transition where you must decide whether you will continue to negotiate with uncertainty or step into it. Negotiation keeps you suspended, always seeking a safer version of what is already being offered. But stepping forward does not eliminate uncertainty, it transforms your relationship with it. What once felt like instability becomes motion. What once felt like risk becomes passage. TAE. Surrender is not the absence of resistance, but the conscious release of resistance that no longer serves your direction. It is the point at which you stop asking whether you are fully prepared in the way fear defines preparation, and begin to recognize that you have already been shaped in ways sufficient for what is now before you. The preparation was never meant to produce certainty, it was meant to produce responsiveness. You may notice that in surrender there is a paradoxical increase in clarity. Not because every detail becomes visible, but because your focus is no longer divided between fear and possibility. Energy that was once consumed by internal conflict becomes available for movement. And in that movement, understanding begins to form in ways that static contemplation could never produce. This is why the threshold does not open wider through hesitation, but through trust expressed in action. Not reckless action, but responsive action, the kind that arises when you finally accept that remaining still no longer protects you, but only postpones what has already been set into motion around you and within you. And in this realization, surrender is no longer something you struggle toward. It becomes the natural turning point where resistance no longer feels justified, where holding back no longer feels aligned with what you have been gradually prepared to become, and where stepping forward is no longer an escape from uncertainty, but the first honest participation in what lies beyond it. And here at last the door ceases to be an idea and becomes a living boundary between who you have been and who you are now being called to become. What awaits on the other side is not merely improvement of circumstance, nor a gentle adjustment of your present life, but a profound reconfiguration of identity itself. For breakthroughs of this nature do not simply add to your story, they rewrite the tone in which the story is told. You may have imagined, in quieter moments, that what lies beyond would resemble your current life for the few added comforts, a few resolved struggles, a few answered prayers. But this is not how true transformation unfolds. It does not decorate the old self, it replaces the framework upon which the old self was built. And so what stands before you is not the continuation of what you already know, but the unfolding of something that will eventually make your former limitations feel like distant memories rather than active definitions of who you are. There is a strange tenderness in this kind of change, though it rarely feels tender while it is happening. It often arrives as disruption first, as unfamiliarity, as the unsettling sense that the ground beneath your previous assumptions is no longer stable. Yet this disruption is not destruction for its own sake. It is the necessary loosening of what could not accompany you further. For identity, like a vessel, must sometimes be reshaped in order to hold what it was, never large enough to contain before. You will find that beyond this threshold, the questions you once asked begin to change. No longer are you preoccupied with whether you are capable, whether you are worthy, whether the timing is right. Those questions, though once central, begin to lose their authority. In their place arise quieter, more grounded recognitions, questions not of permission, but of direction, not of doubt, but of alignment. You begin to ask not can I, but what now becomes possible because I have moved. And this shift is significant because it signals that you are no longer negotiating with your potential, you are inhabiting it. The person who hesitated at the door is not the same person who walks through it. Something fundamental is altered in the crossing itself, as though the act of choosing becomes the moment of becoming. It is not that transformation waits on the other side, rather, it is activated by the crossing. Yet what is most striking about this new reality is not its grandeur, but its clarity. Things that once felt fragmented begin to align. Patterns that once seemed random reveal their coherence. Even past difficulties, when viewed from within this new perspective, begin to take on a different meaning, not as wasted time, but as necessary shaping. What once felt like interruption is revealed as preparation, and what once felt like delay is seen as precision. Still, it would be a mistake to assume that this new identity removes challenge. It does not eliminate difficulty, it changes your relationship to it. You are no longer defined by what resists you, but by what you are now capable of moving through. Strength, in this sense, is no longer theoretical. It is lived, tested, refined through action rather than anticipation. And so, as you stand at the final edge of this moment, you begin to understand that what heaven has been preparing you for was never simply an outcome, but a version of yourself that could only be revealed through stepping beyond what was familiar. The door, which once represented uncertainty, now reveals itself as a necessary passage, and the 10 seconds that seem so brief become, in hindsight, the concentrated point where everything you were becoming finally met the decision that made becoming unavoidable.